Within the last few decades, there have been numerous amounts of websites that are home to a plethora of games, but among these websites, there was one that most people found themselves coming back to given its robust game selection alongside the nostalgia people grew for the site, given that it was one of the only accessible ways of playing video games on your computer while being at school. This website would be none other than CoolMath Games, a site that in my opinion was way ahead of its time. But what made CoolMath Games so iconic? To express why I personally think there'll never be another website like CoolMath Games, I first want to take a dive into some of the most renowned games on the site, because at the end of the day, what is CoolMath Games without the games? The first game I present to you is the world's hardest game, a game that despite its popularity has very few victors. Released on March 21st of 2008 by Snubbyland, this game would quickly foster quite a large community behind it as players would take on the absurd challenge that is the world's hardest game. But even with the game's difficulty, it still served as a game that anyone could play as the inherent concepts of each of the levels were relatively simple. As you start off in the first level, you end up playing as this red cube with your only movement options being the arrow keys. It is your job to not only dodge the dots, but to collect the yellow dots and make it to the end of each level without dying. While these green zones are where the level starts and ends, there will sometimes be green zones packed in between the start and end points that serve as checkpoints, but as you can imagine, checkpoints would become fewer and farther between as you progress through the game. The beauty of the world's hardest game was the fact that anyone could beat the first few levels, but it was simultaneously a game where rarely anyone would ever see the end of the game. It was a game that had both simplicity and complexity. As time progressed, a sequel to the world's hardest game would come out, and this game was much more difficult than the first one. In fact, the second game was so much more difficult that the first ever deathless run of the game was only completed 6 months ago by Daneker, despite the game being out for about a decade at this point. However, it doesn't end here, as there was a third world's hardest game release which once again bumped the difficulty but even took on some new gimmicks alongside a new format, as the game consisted of 5 large levels instead of a multitude of small levels. It's safe to say that the world's hardest game is a classic, even if most of us never saw the end of the game, but even to this day, there are still people like Daneker who are pushing the games to their absolute limits. Similar to the world's hardest game, Bloxors was another game that had both simplicity as well as complexity. Puzzle solving is of the essence in Bloxors, as the goal of the game is to put your block in the hole. As you progress through the 33 levels, new mechanics and gimmicks are introduced, and the levels of course become way more difficult to solve, especially when it's very easy to get lost in the sauce. Despite this game being released all the way back in August of 2007, it's a game that in my opinion was simply just ahead of its time, as it was a game that is accessible to everyone while simultaneously being a game that has a very high skill cap. Sure, Bloxors isn't an extraordinary concept or game, but it was original for its time, and it was an especially fun game to try and figure out, whether it be by yourself or with other people. Next up, we got Papa's Pizzeria, which was a game that I personally didn't experience until my later years in school, because at the time, I just didn't see the appeal. I mean, sure, I'm all for moving this quirky block, but making pizzas? That's just weird. But when I played this game for the first time, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that there's actually quite a lot of content to unpack within these games. The game of course starts out with you making some pretty basic pizzas, but as you progress, the pizzas get more and more challenging to make, and my favorite part was actually delivering the pizzas and interacting with other characters in the game. I mean, there's even a surprising amount of lore across all of the Papa games, which if you want to learn more about, I'd highly recommend watching Chupo's video on it, because things get bizarre. Now there's a multitude of Duck Life games, but the first one was released all the way back in 2007, and it not only laid the foundation for the Duck Life series, but in my opinion was one of the cornerstones of CoolMath games. You start off as a weak duck, but as you play the different training games, you are able to become strong enough to partake in races with other ducks. In the first game, there is a mini game to train your flying, your energy, your running, and your swimming. But if you so choose to play the Duck Life games outside of CoolMath games, you'll find yourself doing way more than that. Now, Fireboy and Watergirl was another game that I hadn't really explored all too much because for the longest time, I never had a water girl to compliment me, the Fireboy. In fact, I thought I'd never even touched this game, but then I realized that I don't need a water girl. And to my amazement, this game was surprisingly ahead of its time. Each level has a rank as well as a set amount of time that you are given to complete it, and the puzzles are very unique and satisfying to complete. Since the levels are designed around the two characters, there will be sections that only Fireboy is able to traverse and vice versa. This same concept applies to the collectibles given that they are color coded to their respective characters. Next up, we got Bloons Tower Defense, and you may be thinking, wow, this game was so successful that they made 6 of them, with the 6th one eventually being released on Steam, but you would be wrong. What started out as a flash game released in the late 2000s would turn into a series that would be home to not 6 games, but 44 of them. Most of these games have been lost to time, but alas, the Bloons games we all know and love still hold up even to this day. You start off as just a basic monkey popping basic balloons, but each round you are able to upgrade your monkey to take on harder balloons. It's crucial that you not only choose your upgrades wisely, as each monkey has its own unique ability and upgrades, but it's crucial that you place your monkeys accordingly so that you don't let any balloons get to the end of the stage. Despite this game's concept being very simple, the later rounds can be quite difficult and in some cases feel almost unbeatable. And how could I make a video on CoolMath games without mentioning what is in my opinion the most iconic series of games on the site? Enter the Run series. This trilogy of games was where I spent the most of my time on CoolMath games, and I can remember playing Run as early as 2012. As you enter the world of Run, you are placed in space as an alien and you are met with 50 levels to beat. This game will test your platforming skills, and there are even certain levels which you are able to take multiple routes to make it to the end, considering that you have the ability to latch onto walls. Run also has an infinite mode where you can see how long you're able to survive. However, things are taken up a notch with Run 2, where the game introduces the skater, and as you can imagine, the skater is not only able to go faster, but cover more distance. However, the caveat here is that you're not able to jump as high. Run 2 also introduced these little collectibles, which if you get enough of them, you'll be able to unlock 6 bonus levels. But when Run 3 came around, the series was once again revolutionized as there is just so much content to unpack. I still remember the euphoria I felt when I first beat Run, and when I'm feeling nostalgic for CoolMath games, you already know this franchise is popping right into my head. Now, have you noticed that I have not mentioned a single math game? Well, that is the genius of CoolMath games. You see, there are math games on the website, but that's obviously not the main focus of the site. The Flash games are where the site shines, and had the website been marketed differently, all of these amazing games might have never seen the light of day. So many of us have nostalgia for CoolMath games because we are able to go on our school computers and just play these games during class. Furthermore, the fact that so many people know about CoolMath games is just a testament to how much time we really waste. Schools have only recently caught on to CoolMath games, but even then, there are still plenty of ways to play games on the site, even with search restrictions as well as the shutdown of Flash. But above all, CoolMath games is memorable, and it'll always be that way.